Well, I first became interested in this story because of Lori Conlevitt's tremendous documentary on PBS back in, I think it was 2004. How many of you saw that? Just a wonderfully entertaining documentary. And I said to myself, you know, I've worked as a journalist in this town for far more than a decade, and I don't ever remember hearing Brownie Wise's name mentioned. And I thought it would be an interesting story to pursue, and that's why I started pursuing it. And fortunately, so many people like Mr. Ponticelli and Mr. McDonald were so giving with their memories. And also Brownie Wise's papers and Earl Tupper's papers are on loan at the Smithsonian. So I was able to go up there for a week and research their papers and actually tell their own stories, basically through their own words, through the memos, through the letters, and through everything else. But in doing the research, it was obvious that both Tupper and Wise really had to pick themselves up and dust themselves off from failure in their early lives. Brownie had married Robert Wise. They'd had a child. They were living up in suburban Detroit. And you know, it was obvious it was not going to work out between them. And Brownie divorced him. And we're talking the late 1940s. So basically, she's a single mom, and she's going to have to go out and support her kid. And so, as luck would have it, one day this Stanley dealer knocks on the door, and he gives this sort of fumbling presentation about the Stanley line. And she thought to herself, okay, well, I could do better than that. And that's how she became a Stanley dealer. And about that time, Earl Tupper had been a tree doctor. And that had lasted for about 7 or 8 years. And then the Depression had hit, and his business went bankrupt. Earl Tupper was a bankrupt tree doctor. And fortunately, plastics were a big part of the area where he lived. And he got into the plastics business. And he, for years, had been searching and searching for his first proprietary product. And boy, did he make a good one. So now we have the product, but we still have a problem. How do we sell it? He took it to the best department stores of the day. He put it in there, J.L. Hudson department store in Detroit, and it just kind of sat there because people didn't really know exactly what to do with it. Until a young guy came along who worked with Brownie Wise in her Stanley operation, a 16-year-old kid that they nicknamed Mr. Stanley. And he went in to that department store and thought he saw something. It was no wonder a place so bustling would attract the attention of an ambitious 16-year-old kid like Gary McDonald. J.L. Hudson carried all 14 items of the original Tupperware Millionaire line. On a trip through the store one day after high school, the Wonder Bowls caught his eye. And McDonald also spied the Bell Tumbler on sale for $1. But these so-called products of the future were hardly flying off the shelves. Usually they just sat there until a store employee showed the customers how to apply the Tupper seal. Then the containers could be turned upside down or even dropped without the contents inside being spilled or otherwise ruined. People had to be told that the bowls and canisters were specially designed for the refrigerator or the pantry shelves. Immediately, McDonald told himself, man, that could be a great home demonstration product. McDonald knew he had to share his discovery with their dynamic manager, the woman who would forever claim a place in the history of Tupperware. At one of their regular Monday morning Stanley sales meetings, McDonald brought Tupperware to the Dearborn home of Brownie Wise. She, like most other Tupperware novices, wasn't quite sure what to do with it. Who ever heard of a bowl you squeeze? Wise reflected many years later. And in the beginning, I really struggled to get the seal on right. Then I accidentally knocked the bowl onto the floor. I was so surprised when it bounced, I called out to my mother. Why? This bowl actually bounces. We ended up using that line in our promotion. It bounces instead of breaks. As Wise struggled with the seal, she finally came to the conclusion that you had to burp it just like a baby. So that's how Brownie got involved with Tupperware. Less than 2 years after her Stanley ambitions had been crushed because the top brass had told her that management was no place for a woman, all of a sudden, Wise was poised to ascend to some of the highest levels of Tupperware distribution in the day. Wise would be breathing rarefied air. In 1950, 95% of American women were confined to low-paying jobs in one of four categories: light manufacturing, retail, clerical, health, or education. That left just 5% in professions and management. Wise and Collimore sealed the deal at her home on Melbourne Street. The entire state of Florida would be hers as distributor to populate with Tupperware dealers and branches. With almost 3 million residents in 1950, Florida promised to be a lucrative territory as well as a dream place to call home. In the midst of a frigid Michigan winter, Wise broached the idea with her son Jerry of moving south. "Gosh, yes, it's warm," the 11-year-old gushed. "Let's go." Pretty soon after that, the person with which he had been dealing to try to forge distribution, things fell apart, and he was in need of a solution very quickly. And he called Brownie Wise and some of the other top distributors up to a meeting. And they all sat together, and they all basically said, "Look, if you want this to work, you got to take all of this stuff off the retail shelves so we can sell it exclusively on the party plan. And then we really think this stuff is going to go." And Tupper said, "Okay." And he saw what a spark plug Brownie Wise was, so he put her in charge of the sales end and created Tupperware Home Parties. And for a while, it was operating up in Fisherville, Massachusetts. But Brownie was obviously very anxious to get back. Earl Tupper liked the idea of operating down in the South where they didn't have unions. So he's looking for some cheap land. And as luck would have it, there was a cattle baron in Osceola County who had a whole heck of a lot of property at the time. And after that, history would be made. But for the time being, Tupperware had to go to somewhere temporarily to at least get things going in Florida. And a lot of you may not know, some of you do, but a lot of you may not, the Tupperware Home Party's first year was actually spent in Orlando, in an airplane hangar. And as a matter of fact, the person who drove the very first truck full of product over the state line into Orlando and into that hangar is that man right there, Gary McDonald, in 1952. And I really like that because I think a lot of people don't realize that Tupperware's freshman year was spent in Orlando. And it was some of the best times between Tupper and Wise, too, because she had standardized this system of training the dealers and really getting everybody to march from the same sheet of music. And the product was really starting to sell big time. As things start to go so well, excuse me, and they move down south, Brownie is going around Lake Toho to find a place to live. And she drives around the corner, and her son is telling me about seeing this. And here is this palatial home out on basically an island in Lake Toho. And she moves into it. It was built in the 20s, and it was Spanish motif, 8 or 9 rooms, Spanish tile. It was a palace. And she called it Water's Edge. So there was Brownie, and you know, back in her early days in Detroit, she had developed this alter ego. She wrote for the paper there, and she called herself Hibiscus. And she wrote of this fictional world where she lived in a big mansion and, you know, had the attentive husband and had the finer things in life. And now all of a sudden that sort of movie star dream was coming true. Brownie died in 1992, and I was going through eBay not too awfully long ago when I found this, an original copy of her book, Best Wishes. And what made it particularly interesting was there was this inscription inside from Brownie. And as you notice, if you can see her signature, she always signed it with a ruler at the bottom, so it was spot on straight. And she had written it to a fellow named Don Boyette back in June of 1980. A musty old relic, a trite memento of yesterday for a new friend of today. A fond salute to Don Boyette, Brownie. 12 years later, Don was the one who wrote her obit in the Sentinel. And it was a really pretty, it was very nice what he wrote.